Hi guys, in this week's lesson I'm going to talk about rhythm changes and how you can work your way through fast moving changes like that in fairly high tempos. So if you don't know what rhythm changes is, the rhythm changes progression is actually the chord progression that is found in the song called I Got Rhythm by Gershwin, and it's used really a lot in hard bop and bebop especially, where there's been written quite a lot of melodies over this chord progression. So in fact it has almost the status of something like a 12-bar blues, that it's something that's played really often, and it's almost a specific kind of progression that you need to be able to play on, and you need to have a few approaches because you're likely to be asked to play rhythm changes on a regular basis. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to go over shortly what the rhythm changes is, like in terms of what chords there are. Then I'm going to show you some exercises and also a way of thinking that makes it a little bit easier to play and a little bit easier to handle when you're playing this, because rhythm changes is something that's played mostly in a medium up or maybe even up tempo, so it's around 200 beats per minute or higher, and there are certain things you can do to make that a little bit easier to work through this kind of progression, because it has a lot of chords. But let's first just go over what a rhythm change progression is. The rhythm changes form is 32 bars, and it's an AABA form, which means that it has an A part of 8 bars and a B part of 8 bars. And the troublesome part of this song is usually the A parts, because they have these fast moving turnarounds. If you want to know a little bit more about turnarounds and how they work, you can check out some of my lessons on that. I already made 3 of them. Just to demonstrate what rhythm changes A part is, that would be these chords. And as you might be able to tell, it's actually the same progression 3 times, because you have the turnaround in B flat, the 1-6-2-5 happening most of the time. Sometimes you'll see substitutions, but what it boils down to is pretty much that it's this progression, and then in bar 5 and 6 you get this small trip to the 4th degree, and then you go back from the 4th degree with a sharp 4 or with a 4 minor. Those are sort of the main variations you have. But since this is often played fast, it gets a little bit busy if you start nailing all the changes all the time. So what I would suggest to do is that first you simplify the progression a bit. And the way we're going to do that is that we're going to leave out the 6 and we're going to leave out the 2 in the turnarounds. And on the 4th degree, so basically that means that the first 2 bars is going to be above B flat and above F7, and the same for the 3rd and 4th bar, and then in the 5th and 6th bar we're going to have B flat 7, so the dominant to the 4th degree for 1 bar, and then the 4th degree for 1 bar. So we are leaving out a chord there too. This gives us another progression that's a lot easier to play on, because that gives us this progression. So now we've reduced the amount of chords to half of what it was in the beginning, and we're still sort of keeping the main movement of what's going on. I mean, the chords that we took out are pretty much embellishments of the core progression, and you really have only like 1 5 1 5 happening all the time in a rhythm change. So the next thing we want to work out is actually how do we solo on this, and I've chosen to do this since we're playing the B flat here, and that's sort of the first place you associate with this key, mainly because you just have the root on the 6th string. It's fairly intuitive on guitar. I'm gonna go over first the arpeggios of the simplified progression, so the what's that, 4 arpeggios that we need. And then we're gonna work a bit with that, and then we're also gonna expand that to include the scales that are associated with these arpeggios, because in this case, because we're moving from B flat to F7, the arpeggios already have two common notes, so it's difficult to really play it clearly just with the arpeggios, or it can be a little bit tricky anyway, and maybe it's more useful to move already directly to the scales, but then we need to do that from coming from the arpeggios to make that, to keep it clear and to keep the lines harmonically sound. So that's the route we're going to do. So the first thing we're going to do is just to go over the arpeggios. So that's example 2, where I have the arpeggios written out for the A part. So simple, but as you can already hear, because of the common notes, you don't really hear as clearly a change as you would in, for instance, the blues, where there are more different notes coming from one chord to another. If you want to see an example of that, then you can check. I have a few lessons on blues in F and blues in B flat, and there I do the same thing, and you can really hear, like, okay, now the chords are changing. Here it gets a little bit more vague what is going on, because we're staying in the key. This is more of a tonal progression, and the scale changes and the changes in the chords are a little bit more subtle. But still, we do have the arpeggios. The next thing you need to check out is probably just to play these arpeggios and connect them. So now we have the arpeggios, you need to practice them, of course, and you need to practice them in different ways. And probably if you're playing rhythm changes, there's a good chance that you already know them. And the next thing I would suggest to do is to try and just play them through this progression, but then connecting them. That would be something like this. So in that way we can connect the arpeggios, and of course you can already try to play a simple solo just using the arpeggios. That's very healthy. That's a good way to approach this, because once we start adding the scales, you still have to emphasize the arpeggio notes to make strong melodies within the changes. So if you can play already a bit just using the arpeggios, then that's already good. Like. Something like this, practicing stuff like that is already a good idea. You cannot know your arpeggios too well. That's what it's always going to boil down to. So the way I would suggest you start by practicing the scales. I mean, I expect that you already know how to play a complete position of the B flat major scale here and the E flat major scale, and for now that's the only two scales you really need. But it's better to practice this on the progression, and I'm going to do that in a way that I learned from an American piano player called Barry Harris that I did some workshops with here in The Hague, because he has a really sort of nice system for doing that, and it works quite well. It can be a bit tricky with guitar because sometimes you don't get all the range of the instrument that you need when you're doing this, but as a starting point it's good. You can always try and do it in several octaves, experiment a bit with it, but it also gives you just a bit something to hold on to when you start working with the scales. So that would be this. So in that way I'm just playing from the root up to the 7th, and since I only have one chord every bar, then that will work. And I also get, as an added bonus, I get the forehand to move back to the next chord. So the way I would suggest you approach making melodies with the scale and the arpeggios is that you sort of take the arpeggio as a starting point and then see if you can add notes in between with the scale. So that means that if you're on B flat and you want to play from the D to the F, which are both in the arpeggio, you can add the E flat in between. Or the same if you're going from B flat to D, you can add the C. And that way of thinking will help you make melodies that, even though you're using notes that are not strictly in the chord, you're using them as passing notes, and you're using them to make melodies that still sound like that chord. And of course the same goes for the F7, so if I'm going from C to E flat, I can add the D in between. And I think if you check out the example that I wrote for this, it should show you that way of thinking in making the melodies, and maybe give you some ideas on how to get started with that. And in that way you can sort of get started just in a medium tempo to improvise on a rhythm change, and that should help you because you don't have to think as many chords, and because it's a sort of fairly logical way to play it, then that should help you make some clearer lines when you start going for higher tempos. Probably you want to do that gradually still, of course, but the fact that you can just hear while you're playing is going to help you a lot, because this is also what's going to help you keep the form in higher tempos and stay connected to the song that you're playing. If you just sort of playing randomly up and down the scale, you're probably gonna lose the form, and you're also probably not gonna play something that really makes that much sense. So for that reason you need to sort of build it up from a slower tempo. But with this reduced version that should be a lot easier. Let's check out the example. So that was the example. Actually I've written another example, but I ended up improvising one, and then I just finished transcribing it because I thought that was a better way to do it. Mostly because then it sounds like I really would play with this kind of material. So the first two bars that will be this phrase. It's quite simple because on the B flat I'm just using the third and the root, and then I'm also still staying really within the arpeggio on the F7 the first time around. So that's just the triad, seventh, and then I'm resolving to the third of the B flat, but I'm using a leading note and I'm just sliding up to that. So it's written out like that. I think what you can already tell here is that the important thing is just much more the rhythm than it is the sort of the arpeggios or how complicated the lines are, because in the end jazz is about rhythm. It's not really about making complicated lines. And if you listen to I think this will be evident for most of the example. If you listen to people like Jim Hall and Wes Montgomery, when they're playing faster tempos, they're not actually playing that many notes. So you want to make sort of rhythmical phrases that make sense with simple material. That's a good way to do it. And you want to work on this in a slower tempo than what I actually played it in because I played it in almost 200 in this video. Work on it slower, but still sort of keep the idea of the rhythms. You'll see that what I'm playing is a little bit more riff-like. I'm repeating notes. I'm sort of really trying to make melodies with simple things rather than just running up and down arpeggios, because in the end that's a much more musical choice. So the next two bars is this. So on the B flat, again, just simple, fifth, third, and then repeating the fifth to make that melody. But the melody is not on the one, because we were resolving on the forehand. So the phrase starts on the two, and then a similar sort of idea, but since we're on the F7, I'm using the third and the root, and then just doing this. And and then when we're going to the B flat 7 to the E flat in bar 5 and 6. So again, the rhythm, the first part of the rhythm is really only offbeats, so that makes it a little bit difficult to play in higher tempos. But for the rest, it's just arpeggio notes. And then on the E flat, I'm just running down the arpeggio from the root to the third. And then we get the last turnaround of the first A, which is just, again, just arpeggio. And then we get on the last F7, I'm sort of using, here I'm using scale a bit more, because what I'm playing is actually a little bit more like a C minor. And the C is kind of almost a ghost note at the end, but... and then we get to the second A. So that's the first two bars. B flat major 7 arpeggio. And then I need to continue this kind of melody, but I need to move to the F7. So the way I do that is, instead of moving from the A to the B flat that I did the first time, I move up to the C, which is the fifth of the C7, of the F7. And then just use the F triad before resolving to the third of the B flat. Then I actually have a whole bar of nothing. And then on the F7, so that's the thing about like the outline of the phrase is still the arpeggio, and then the other notes are more leading notes, diatonic leading notes. And of course this leads very well to the third on the B flat 7. And just to be clear, I'm really running up for the A flat, because that wasn't in the scale before, so you can really hear where we are if you do that. Then we get a little bit of a longer 8-note line on the E flat. So that would be this. So it's kind of the same phrase, just moved down in the scale, where I'm starting on the third, and then making this sort of encircling of the F, and then I'm using the 7th and doing the same thing, and that works really well, because then I'm going from E flat down to the D on the final B flat major, and then the last phrase on the B flat major, it's sort of a simple, I need to end the solo, and also normally if I would do something else there, I would do something that's leading into the bridge, but since I don't have the bridge here, then that didn't make too much sense, so I just played, which is just, in fact, B flat, half bar of F, and then B flat, but you could also just see this all B flat. So that was an example of how you can get started working on rhythm changes with an approach that should make it easier for you to also play on it when the tempo gets a bit higher. I think if you check out soloists like Parker, and I've heard that from Jim Hall and Wes Montgomery too actually, that they use this approach from time to time, and sometimes they will then dig in and start putting in all the changes and sort of go back and forth. So this is something that you need for that too, because you need to be able to have a varied solo, so that you don't always just play all the changes all the time, but also sometimes just sort of can lay back and play only part of the progression, or maybe the main part of the progression and not all the embellishments. That's a different way to look at it. In any case, I hope that you like this lesson. If you like it, then feel free to like it here on YouTube, and you can subscribe to my channel if you want to. I make a lesson every week. You can go to my website and download a PDF if you want to. There's a link in the description. And there you can also subscribe to my newsletter, if you want to stay up to date with lessons, and if I publish a lesson on another platform than YouTube or something like that, usually I put it in my newsletter. On my website I also have a WebShop. You can buy some of the lessons. I have a few lessons that are more in-depth looks at how you can apply some of the stuff that I talk about here. If you have any comments or suggestions for things I could talk about in my lessons, then connect with me on one of the social media platforms like Twitter or Instagram or Google+, and let me know there. It's nice to hear what you guys want to hear lessons about. It's also useful if I know if something is working or not. So it's always nice to get some feedback on the lessons. So for that, please let me know what you think. And especially you can of course leave it as a comment here on the video itself. I really do try to get back to everybody who comments. So that's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.